But this episode is more fundamental because what I realized is nobody has any clue what a chief information security officer is supposed to be. Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome, 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 welcome. I hope you know what time it is. It's time for Life of a CISO with yours truly, Dr. E is in the house. I just want to take a moment before we jump into today's topic just to say how much I appreciate you. If this is your first time, thank you. Thank you for joining me. And most importantly, if you're somebody who's been following me for 3, 6, 9, 12 months, I truly appreciate the trust you've put in me and the continued support. So just thank you. Just wanted to give some appreciation as we get started. And this episode is one that's sort of been a discovery over the last several weeks. I started spending a lot of time with CEOs, and CISOs who essentially were having difficulty. These are basically companies, entities, and organizations where either the CEO has called me in and said, Eric, we are just not gelling with our CISO. We are concerned about cybersecurity. It is the number one concern and number one priority for our organization, yet we can't get the information and the data we need from our CISO. It's like there's a communication gap going on. And then there's been a few cases where I've been called by the company saying, can you work with our CISO? And I meet with the CISO and they're like, Eric, I am so frustrated. I am trying to do my job. I'm trying to help the organization, but nobody is listening to me and nobody is doing what I ask. Now, yes, there is a communication component to that. And please go back. I believe it was 2 or 3 episodes ago. I did a whole series on communication, how to communicate, and the importance of communication. But this episode is more fundamental because what I realized is nobody has any clue what a chief information security officer is supposed to be. It's like this crazy thing has happened. All of a sudden, out of the blue, people started saying organizations need a chief focusing on information security. And we came up with this term, CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. And every company said, we got to have one. And every security professional said, I want to be one. Because who doesn't want to be a chief? And who doesn't want to be an officer? Right? So all of a sudden, this term started getting traction where companies and boards and even regulatory committees like the SEC are saying any publicly traded company must have a CISO. And all of a sudden, security engineers who are 8 or 10 years in the making and are tired of having senior security engineer are like, I want to be a chief. There's one problem. Nobody ever defined what that role is supposed to be. So I go into these companies and I'm meeting with either the CEO, COO, or even the CISO, and I ask them all the same question. What is the focus and responsibility of the CISO? In 2 or 3 sentences, can you give me a job description of what their primary or what your primary responsibility is? And you get these, nobody knows. So I'm like, whoa. Eric, yes, communication is the issue, but it's not the root cause. The root cause is that nobody knows what the CISO is supposed to do. So if you don't have a clear job description, that's going to be problematic. And the bigger challenge is if executives aren't clear on the role, then they're going to get frustrated because the person is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, but nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing. So we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a moment. But we have a more important topic to cover. So then I said, okay, nobody knows what a CISO is supposed to do. But let's peel back the onion a little bit. Let's peel it back. If a CISO is a chief information security officer, we know what chief officers are supposed to do. That one was pretty clear. Now it's interesting. Chief officer is very clear to an executive. If you ask a CEO or a COO or CFO what a chief officer is supposed to do, they will all tell you. Chief officers are supposed to be responsible for the growth and profitability of the company. A chief officer is focusing on growing revenue, growing market share, and growing the overall profitability. It's very clear to executives. But here's the issue. It's not clear to CISOs. When I go in and I talk to a CISO and I say, what is the primary role of a chief officer? They don't know. I'll get answers like, well, it's to focus on cybersecurity. No. You didn't listen. I don't care about the middle letters. I'm asking you a chief officer, not related to cybersecurity, just in general. Whether you're a chief financial officer, a chief executive officer, or a chief information security officer, the middle letters we're not worried about. What is a chief officer supposed to do? And they don't know. So the first issue is executives are clear on a chief officer, but technical people are not. So if you want to become a CISO, or you're currently a CISO, it's easy. Chief officers are responsible for the growth, the expansion, and the profitability of the company. A chief officer is focused on growing the revenue, building a solid reputation in your customer base and future customers, and increasing overall profitability of the organization. That is the primary responsibility. And this is why so many CISOs struggle. Because I still, and I'm shocked, in the current year we're in, that CISOs still think it's a technical position. They still think, I hear when I talk to CISOs, a CISO is the most senior security engineer in the company. If you're a Family Feud person, right? That is not correct. And that is why CISOs are struggling. That is why people aren't listening to CISOs, because it's not a technical position. It's a business-focused position. Chief officer. So part of the issue is the CISO doesn't know what a chief officer is. So now you do. Now you know that your primary role, if you want to be listened to and you want to be invited to meetings and you want to have a seat at the table, you need to recognize that your primary focus is on the success of the company, the revenue, the reputation, and the profitability of the company. So that's one issue. But then even when I fixed that, even when I got CISOs aligned with chief officer, there was a deeper problem. I started going in and I started asking the executives and even security folks, both of them struggled. I said, what is information security? What is cyber security? Because if we got the outer letters, chief officer down, we need to get the inner letters. So what is information security or cyber security? And this is the crazy part. Very few people could answer it, even security people. I know people have doing security for 10 or 12 years, and I ask them, give me a one-sentence definition of cyber security, and they fumble. Well, come on, Eric, you know what it is. Okay, that's not a definition. If I go to Webster, right, and I look up and it says, you know what it is, that's not a definition. So the first foundational root problem is organizations do not have a clear definition of what we're trying to do with cyber security. So let's start there and work our way up. Cybersecurity. One sentence definition. Cybersecurity is understanding, managing, and mitigating the risk of your critical assets being disclosed, altered, or denied access. Let me say that again. Cybersecurity is understanding, managing, and mitigating the risk of your critical assets being disclosed, altered, or denied access. So if we really want to peel it back, cybersecurity is focused on three things. Risk management. It means you have to be willing to accept risk. This is why world-class security engineers do not make world-class CISOs. World-class security engineers typically do not accept risk. A world-class security engineer is brilliant at telling you all the vulnerabilities and telling you why you shouldn't do it. Oh, you shouldn't roll that system out because of this vulnerability and this vulnerability and this vulnerability. Here's the issue. The company has to make money, and businesses are taking risks all the time. A chief officer, what makes them masterful is the ability for them to look at the pros and cons and make risk-based decisions where the benefit to the organization outweighs the risk to the organization. Risk is not new to cybersecurity. Risk is something that everybody does as part of their life. When you wake up in the morning, do you realize in the first hour, you are making a series of risk-based decisions? When you get out of bed and start walking to the bathroom, that's a risk-based decision. You could slip and fall. You could slip and fall and bang your head and be unconscious. But you've made the risk-based decision that you wake up and you make sure you're alert enough before you start walking, and the risk is low enough that you're willing to take it. Then, when you brush your teeth, you are making a risk-based decision that that toothpaste is not poison, that the mouthwash is not poison. Now, there have been cases where they have recalled, right, those products, and they've had issues or problems with them. So that's not zero risk. It's probably single digit, but it's not Is there a risk? Then, probably one of the biggest risks you take is getting in your car to drive to work. Accidents happen all the time. Now, it's not going to happen to you. I want to make sure we clear positive energy, right? None of us are going to get into accident. I want to make sure I'm clear there, right? But the point is, that's a risk. Now, all those things you don't think of as risks because you've done them for so long and you've mitigated to the point where you feel it's so acceptable, you don't even think about it anymore. But the reality is they're risks. Business is the same way. Now, cyber risk is focused on what is the value or benefit or functionality you get, and what is the risk of being compromised or something negative happening to the organization from a cyber digital standpoint. So a world-class information security officer is going to say, okay, what value or benefit do we get to the organization? What is the risk of a data compromise, getting attacked or broken into? And then, is the value or benefit worth the risk? And here's where you become a world-class CISO. Average CISOs will sometimes say yes and sometimes say no. So they will sometimes go back to the business and say, the risk is too great, you shouldn't do it. And here's the problem. They don't listen to you because that's not your job. Remember, chief officers are not focused on diminishing the revenue of the company. So if there's an idea that could generate $50 million, but the risk is too great, your job is not to say no, because that's not what chief officers do. Your job is to show them how to do it in a more secure manner. You say, yes, this could generate 50 million. But right now, the way you have it set up, there's an 80% chance that it could cost us 200 million. As a chief officer, that's not acceptable. I'm not willing to run the risk of 50 million and lose 200 million. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to roll it out in this fashion where now we spend $1 million to reduce the risk to 10%. And now instead of 50 million, we make 49 million, but the risk of losing 200 million is very minimal. That's a world-class CISO. And very few CISOs can do that, which means if you can master that skill, you will be very elite and very sought after. So we got risk. Now, let's talk about the second definition of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, I'm going to keep saying it because nobody gets it, is all about understanding, managing, and mitigating the risk of your critical data being disclosed, altered, or denied access. So the next piece is critical data. Do you know and understand what the critical data is for your organization? In priority order. So if I went in and gave you a piece of paper and said, pop quiz, list the 5 most critical pieces of data and the business processes that support them, can you answer that question? And very few CISOs can. Once again, this is where we take you from average to world class. So you need to know what the critical data is, and then you need to know for your organization, what is the biggest impact? Is it the information being disclosed, altered, or denied access? Most of us And most people, when they think of cybersecurity, they only think of disclosure. They only think of confidentiality. However, there's a lot of cases where integrity and availability are just as important. And this is why ransomware has had such a big impact on industries, because all they were focused on was making sure it's not disclosed. But they never stepped back and said, if the data's not available, that's even worse. We cannot function without the data, and that's why ransomware attacks took organizations by surprise. So a world-class CISO knows and understands the percent, how much money, energy, and effort should we put against confidentiality, how much should we put against integrity, and how much should we put against availability, and they vet that with the executive team. So now we're starting to make progress. We need to know and understand cybersecurity. So the first role of a CISO is educating the executives on what is cybersecurity. Because how in the world can you do your job if nobody knows what your job is? If nobody can define cybersecurity or information security, the middle two letters of CISO, how in the world can you be effective? And I even recommend doing this during the interview process. So if you're switching jobs or you're becoming a CISO for the first time, I make very sure, very clear, that during that interview with all of the executives, you make sure we're aligned or educate on what is cybersecurity. So I would go in and say, okay, I understand and know that a chief officer is focused on the growth, the reputation, and the profitability of the organization. But what I want to make sure we're clear on is what is cybersecurity in terms of my focus? And then go over the definition with them. Here's the reason. Two powerful reasons. First, you're now making sure you're aligned on your job. Because if they have a different definition of cybersecurity or information security than you do, you're in trouble. Second, if you do it correctly, you almost guarantee you're going to get the job. Why? Because out of all the candidates, unless you're competing against a candidate that watches my podcast, which could happen, but there's plenty of opportunities out there, so I'm not worried about that. But very few candidates have done that. So now when you walk out of the interview, you've educated, you've helped, and you've already given them a ton of value before they even hired you. So now what are they thinking? Now they're saying, wait a second. This candidate has given us so much value for free. Imagine the value they will give us when we hire them in the organization. So that's the first piece. Make sure we are clear on information security. So now let's put it all together. What is a CISO? A CISO is an executive at the company that utilizes cybersecurity in a way to increase revenue, reduce risk, increase reputation, and increase profitability across the company. Now we have a very nice, crisp definition. So the question is, are you doing that? If you're a CISO or becoming a CISO, your main metric is okay. Each quarter, you should step back and say, what did I or my team do to increase profitability and revenue by decreasing the risk of a cyber attack to the organization? And if you can give a crisp number, you are going to be very, very successful. If you can't, you're going to struggle and be in trouble. So a chief information security officer is an executive that can take technical security risks, take problems, translate them to strategic solutions that will reduce risk and increase revenue and profitability to the company. So as a chief information security officer, you should never be saying no. You should never be saying, here's the problem, you figure out the solution. World-class CISOs come up with world-class strategies or world-class solutions. So those are some checks that you want to put in place. And I'll urge you, if you are struggling as a CISO, you need to set up a meeting with the executives and redefine your role. Redefine what a CISO is. Redefine what your deliverables are. And once you get alignment, you'll start to see that everything starts to change. So as we wrap up, cybersecurity is understanding, managing, and mitigating the risk of your critical data being disclosed, altered, or denied access. A chief officer is focused on growing the business, the revenue and profitability, and reducing risk to the organization. So if we put it all together and put a nice bow on it as we start to wrap up, a chief information security officer is an executive that utilizes and understands cybersecurity in a way that they come up with strategies and solutions in cybersecurity to increase profitability and revenue and reduce the overall risk of cyber attacks to the organization. If you understand that definition and your executives understand that definition, everything, and I mean everything, will start to change for you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Life of a CISO, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.